Hi, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. Just like to remind you, if you could, just to mute your mics, that way we can try to reduce any background noise the best we can.
Because traffic is not able to make the left off of Grand, so that level of service significantly improves all the way from E to C. So I think Jersey City they would appreciate that.
Yeah, I think anything that we can show that level service is definitely good. And I think
All right, why don't we get started? So good morning, everyone. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your morning to join us to learn more about our exciting study, JC on the Move. I just want to let you all know that this introductory presentation will be recorded. I'll have our discussions later on in the morning. In the breakout rooms will not be. However, our team will be taking notes throughout the whole time to record all of the feedback we receive. Sam, are you operating the presentation? Perfect, thank you. All right, so for this morning's meeting, we're going to start with a brief welcome and introduction. Then we're going to go into everything about this project, starting with the background, looking at the schedule, the work we've done so far, and then we'll break up into some breakout rooms and have go into some activities to get some feedback from you all this morning.
Hey, Eli, can we pause real quick and just ask about the Spanish translation?
Yes, of course.
Emily,
Sí. Hola a todos, bienvenidos y gracias por venir. Vamos a dar una breve presentación y después dividimos en grupos. Así que si alguien necesita una traducción a español, por favor escribe en el chat. Gracias.
All right, thank you for that. All right, so now I just want to quickly jump in and introduce our project team. So this project is made up of members from Jersey City, the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, Sam Schwartz, Nelson Nygaard, and Connect the Dots. So I'm Elias Gooseman with City Planning. I'm a senior transportation planner at the city. I'd like to hand it off to Lindsay.
Hey everyone, I'm Lindsay Schofield. I'm also a senior transportation planner with Jersey City, and I'll pass it off to Eugene with NJTPA.
Hello, my name is Eugene McGinnis from NJTPA. I'm a principal planner in the systems planning group, and we're providing some regional oversight on the project. I'll hand it off to Mike Flynn.
Morning, everybody. I'm Mike at Sam Schwartz. I'm the project manager for the consultant team working on JC on the Move. Samantha?
Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha. I am with the Sam Schwartz team, serving as one of the transportation planners on the project. And I will pass it off to, has Roseanne gone already?
Nope, I'm Roseanne Lubeck. I'm with Connect the Dots. We're a public engagement firm.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, we're a public engagement firm that's been helping on this project with
Thank you.
some stakeholder interviews and this meeting.
And Janki?
I'm Janki Patel. I am from Sam Schwartz. I'm also a transportation planner from their Jersey City office.
Great, I think that's everybody.
All right, great, thanks all. So just as a quick reminder before we jump in, we're going to show a lot of information, and we just request so we can keep on schedule here that you hold any questions until your breakout rooms, or you can put them in the chat and we'll try to address them there. All right, so as many of you may know, over the past few years, Jersey City has done a lot of planning for its transportation system, which includes studying and developing comprehensive strategies for topics such as walking, biking, traffic safety, and parking over the past few years. However, we found there's still people and places in the city whose trips are not well served by the existing transportation options, and this study aims to fill in these gaps. On top of that, as a city, we need to start planning ahead for Jersey City's projected growth. So that's where this study kind of falls in. So now I'll hand it over to Mike to jump into the study.
Thanks, Eli. So the overarching goal of the study is to explore innovative and emerging transportation modes to determine which can best fill the service gaps, both of existing public transit and as well as expanding the transportation network. And that goal is supported by the three objectives here. The first is to utilize equity as a foundational component to the study. We want to ensure that Jersey City residents see their story, needs, and future life in the recommendations that come out of this study. The second is to identify the needs of people within and around Jersey City so we can advance the modal options that are best suited to help communities meet their full potential. And related to that, the third is to identify the ideal mobility solutions and services that enhance user access, mobility, safety, and efficiency while closing those existing transportation gaps. So over the last few months, we've gotten some things started. On the data collection side, we've reviewed previous studies and plans, which I'll talk about in a moment. We've collected and sifted through a lot of data and analyzed it, including transit and transportation data, equity and environmental justice characteristics, and a scan of emerging transportation technologies to understand what's coming down the pike. On the outreach and partnership side, we developed the community outreach strategy. We did a round of initial stakeholder interviews to understand kind of the key concerns that we should focus on to help shape these meetings and to connect us to other groups, especially so we can make sure we hear from neighborhoods and groups that are not typically heard from. And we also did the transportation preference survey, including the mapping, which I hope you all participated in. So looking out at the project schedule, you see kind of a summary here. So following those initial steps that I just mentioned, these public meetings right now are really the key point where we're going to take what we've learned and what we hear at these meetings and then start to pivot into developing recommendations. So in the coming months, we'll do a detailed review and assessment of potential transportation modes and technologies. And then following that, we'll develop draft recommendations and an implementation roadmap, and we'll share that draft plan with you and the city as a whole for detailed feedback before we finalize it in the early summer. So as Eli mentioned, Jersey City, has been very proactive in looking at its transportation system and planning for these different aspects of it, different modes. And we wanted to make sure we didn't sort of reinvent the wheel and we could learn from all the previous work that's gone on. So we reviewed a whole range of plans, both at the local level here in the city, but also regional plans and state, and really looking at all transportation modes. And we focused on 4 key elements when reviewing the documents. We wanted to understand the vision for transportation in Jersey City and the region, number 1. Number 2, we wanted to identify any goals or existing policies that relate to this study that have already kind of been put out there. Number 3, we wanted to identify previous recommendations that we should take into account as we develop ours. And number 4, we wanted to highlight transportation gaps and needs that have already been identified through those previous planning efforts. So this slide gives you an idea of the data analysis and the types of background information that we reviewed. So the top 5 items here are the key components of the existing conditions analysis, which was really geared towards building a holistic understanding of the city's transportation challenges, gaps, and the needs that people and communities experience. We had a real focus on examining relative access and disparities between different groups, so we could identify groups and neighborhoods with the greatest need and learn about the barriers that they face. And you can see it included a combination of quantitative data-driven analysis as well as qualitative learning that really especially comes from this type of engagement with you. 2 components of this are the Title VI and environmental justice analysis and the transit desert analysis. So I'll just explain what that means because it's a little jargony. Title VI and environmental justice analysis is something that comes from federal policy that's really about trying to address historic inequities with any current and future transportation plans. So when we do that, we focus on minority populations and foreign-born populations and sort of identify those as priority areas in the city. For the transit desert analysis, that's really about identifying where there's a high need for transit, but it's not very well served by transit. And so for that, we look at transit frequency, we look at the network coverage of the transit system, and then we look at that in relation to minority populations, low-income populations, and those with limited English proficiency. So all of this analysis helps inform our upcoming work to evaluate potential solutions, matching them to the needs that we've identified and the priorities we've heard from you and your fellow residents. And just a friendly reminder to please mute at the moment when you're not speaking. Thanks. So what have we found? It's not a surprise that the good news is that Jersey City has a wide range of transportation options and kind of punches above its weight in that sense. There's almost any mode you can think of is here. Maybe the bigger challenge is that not all of these options are convenient to access all over the city, or some options may not serve certain kinds of trips and connections that people are trying to make. And we want to take into consideration the impacts of the pandemic, although we recognize that things may move back towards conditions pre-pandemic. They may never be quite the same. So that's something we're taking into consideration too. Some modes were impacted a lot more in terms of drops in ridership than others. Some have recovered more quickly. City Bike wasn't particularly, ridership didn't drop a whole lot. Bus ridership didn't drop as much as other transit, probably because there's a higher share of essential workers who rely on the bus. But some modes, have stayed pretty low, like ferries. So we're analyzing a whole bunch of different factors across each mode of transportation, and one of them is customer satisfaction. So here you see a couple of examples of customer satisfaction levels for VIA, microtransit vans, Hudson Bergen Light Rail, and New Jersey Transit Bus. And I think this just really captures kind of the impetus for this project, which is that we want to provide options that appeal to users, and we want, that can fill those transportation gaps and make sure that everybody has a good selection of safe, efficient, convenient, affordable transportation options. And the idea is to supplement and fill in the gaps of the existing public transit system rather than to draw riders away from it. So it's really more about adding options and filling those needs rather than just having more redundant kind of options. So one kind of data we're looking at is aggregated, anonymized cell phone location data that gives us a much finer grained understanding and a much more real-time understanding of how people move about and where people move in and around Jersey City. So here you see some pre-pandemic patterns within Jersey City, and you see the density of trips in different parts of the city. So basically trips per square mile from 2019 for all transportation modes. So you can see that Journal Square has the highest density of trips, followed by the area along the waterfront between Exchange Place, Newport Center, the big box retailers north of there, and downtown as well around the Grove Street PATH station. This shows a bit more of a detailed view of that, showing kind of the key movements that people are making. So the thicker, redder lines are basically connections where you see a higher volume of people going between those origins and destinations. So you can see higher level of activity again between the waterfront, or kind of along the waterfront, between the different neighborhoods along the waterfront, between downtown and the waterfront, and also between Journal Square and the surrounding neighborhoods. So we'll be using this data to identify those origin and destination pairs, basically where people are going to and from, that have significant demand, but that maybe are not well served by existing transit options. So we can kind of zero in on those as we develop recommendations. So what does this all mean? Some of our initial findings, which this is what we're seeing in the data, and the point of our online survey, the point of this meeting, is to supplement that with real world experience, all of your perspectives, because the data can only tell us so much. But a few of our key findings are that transit service in Jersey City runs much more frequently during the morning and evening rush hour than at other times of day or on the weekends. Customers often have to wait twice as long for a train or bus outside of those peak periods, and some services stop running altogether. Most of Jersey City falls within a quarter mile or about a 5-minute walk of some transit service, which is shown by the areas in blue on here. But some portions of the city, particularly in the southeast and western areas, lack access to any transit services. A larger portion of the city, including some of the more central areas, are more than half a mile from frequent transit. Job and activity centers that are difficult to access include areas like Hudson Mall, the Big Box Retail Center north of Newport Center, Port Jersey Industrial Park, Liberty State Park, and Liberty State Park Industrial Park, as well as Lincoln Park. And finally, for certain locations that lack access to the path or light rail, it can take more than twice as long for people traveling on transit to complete their trip than if they were driving. And many of these trips originate in areas with high concentrations of those Title VI and environmental justice focus populations. This map summarizes the areas of Jersey City that have relatively higher demand for transit, but are relatively less served by it. So that transit desert analysis that I mentioned earlier. Dark purple areas have high demand for transit, but low transit access. The pink areas have high demand, but moderate access. And the light blue areas have moderate demand and low access. So these basically together are areas we want to prioritize for improving transportation options. For example, several communities within Bergen-Lafayette and the Heights were identified as having high demand for transit, but low access to transit, including both standard and high frequency transit service. Some of these communities also include high concentrations of vulnerable populations, and a combination of physical and geographic barriers contribute to the lack of transit access in these neighborhoods. Also, a number of locations across Jersey City, particularly within Bergen-Lafayette and Journal Square, see higher levels of biking, so say more than 1,000 trips by bike per day, but lack safe infrastructure for people biking. And they also include multiple roads on the city's Vision Zero high injury network, which is basically which roads in the city have a higher rate of traffic crashes that the city's prioritizing for safety improvements. Some neighborhoods, like within Greenville, have high levels of biking and do have existing bike infrastructure, but are not served by City Bike. So that's another example. Okay, last but not least, as we start to take these findings and think about what are the potential solutions, we're doing a review of innovative transportation modes and technologies and emerging options that are out there, so we can understand the full universe of potential solutions that could be applied in Jersey City. Some of these are already in use in Jersey City or in the region, and others would be new. So for each of them, we're evaluating things like the level of the maturity of the technology. Is it already widely in use? Is it being tested? Is it still kind of just a proof of concept at this point? We're looking at the time frame for the market for that transportation mode or technology. So in other words, is it available now? Will it be coming in the next couple of years? Is it still pretty far off? We're understanding who the vendors are and whether there's sort of a healthy market of companies who provide this. If it's provided by private companies, we want to make sure there's sort of stable business models. We're also identifying examples that are being used in other cities so we can see if it's working, how it's working, what we can learn. And then we're, based on that, we're thinking about what are the use cases for that in Jersey City. So what kinds of trips could it serve? What kinds of gaps could it address? And evaluating the barriers to implementing it here. What's the technology feasibility? What's the financial feasibility? Or from the user perspective, is this something that people will want to use or will have hesitations about? And in particular, we're looking at accessibility of each of these modes and technologies. So we want to make sure that they expand access to everybody, including those who may have physical or other disabilities. So the results of this scan will be used to identify the best options that can address the specific transportation access gaps that exist in Jersey City. I'll turn it to Roseanne to transition us to the breakout rooms.
Definitely. Good morning, everyone. We're going to split into 2 different rooms, and we'll be having some facilitators in there as well as some note takers, and we'll be using a tool called Mural to run through 2 exercises, one where we talk about a lot of these different innovative modes and technologies, and then another where we try to apply that to what it would look like in Jersey City. We'll spend just about an hour in there, and then we'll regroup in here for our final conversation. Eli, did you want to say any last words before we jump off?
No, I think that covered it. Looking forward to some great conversations in these breakout rooms.
Okay, so Sam's going to move us over. If you have any trouble, she'll be in the main room to help sort you back in. If you get disconnected, she'll just move you back into the room that you were in.